Thanks to letters, documents, and accounts of people who were acquainted with him, we know a good deal about Mozart the man. I went along to the Library of Congress to talk about that tangible Mozart with James Pruett, chief of the library's music division.
I think he was very attractive, too. I think he exemplified many of the things that most of them wanted to be. The overpowering genius, the rollicking personality, the ability to deal with contemporaries without condescending to them. But most of all, I think they acknowledged his genius.
In his lifetime, he was acknowledged as a genius.
Oh, absolutely.
Even though his musical fortunes rose and fell. And
they did rise and fall.
Yeah.
But if you think of the last operas and the last symphonies and the way in which they were received, variously in some cities, but nonetheless, they were great triumphs, especially Magic Flute.
He was physically a short man.
Physically a short man.
With double chins.
With double chins, a soft face.
Soft face.
Protruding eyes. But always, in at least those portraits that are authenticated, at least I see a sparkle. And I think I see a lot of the mischief that we all associate with the young Mozart.
He was multilingual.
Yes, he was.
He knew Italian, German, French, and probably English at one point.
And Latin.
And Latin, of course.
Because Latin would have been studied, from the very beginning.
That's right.
I don't know the degree to which he was expert in these languages, but he had to be very expert because of dealing with the librettos.
Yes, with Lorenzo da Ponte, his great collaborator particularly, who wrote only in Italian.
That's right, and there's a record of many exchanges in which they're talking about the subtleties of action, of stage direction, and of the content of librettos.
His early death, a few weeks before his 36th birthday, do we have any idea now what he died of outside of bad medical treatment?
The latest version is that he probably died of renal failure, brought on by a streptococcal infection.
Yeah.
Now, it'll always be speculation. We don't have the documents. But the clearest indications from the symptoms that were described to others is that it probably was renal failure.
Was he a moody creature? Was he a man of mercurial moods changing?
No, I don't think so. To be sure, his moods went up and down like everyone else's, and that shows in the letters. But if you were to read the letters as a body of literature, they are, in the main, exuberant,
yes,
happy, full of life, lots of questions, and they're unlike the letters of Beethoven, in which he is down, morose, and complaining.
Beethoven was a grumpy man, and Mozart was a rather merry man, wasn't he?
I think those are...
He loved jokes.
Oh, well, of course. Shows up in the music.
It shows up. Indeed, he wrote a piece called The Musical Joke, which spoofs his own composing, among others.
That's right. That's a favorite example, too.
Yeah.
But the joke frivolity, let's say, or at least happiness, shows up in so many works.
He was in love with Aloysia Weber, the sister of the lady he ultimately married. She was one of the great sopranos of the age, wasn't she?
She certainly was, and perhaps it was her singing that drew him to her. But he finally did marry Costanza.
He married Costanza, who was the lesser lady of the two, I take it.
That's right. But I've always thought she probably is the tougher of the two.
Yeah, she was very tough.
Think of her life after he died.
That's right. She set out to exploit the cult of Mozart after his death with her second husband, a Danish diplomat.
That's right. Nissen.
Nissen, that's right. And they also cleaned up his letters a good deal.
They cleaned up his letters, and they sold a lot of manuscripts.
Yes. Yeah.
Which doesn't offend me.
Oh, no.
No. I mean, it was a common practice. And the values we place on these manuscripts, they also placed, but I think they added other kinds of values.
One more question, briefly. If Mozart's genius was universally recognized, why was he not financially successful all of his life?
I think that there is a slight misunderstanding about his financial success. Towards the end of the life, as we've now found out from some new information, he was paid rather handsomely. And I suppose the most severe criticism you can make was that he was irresponsible.
Yes.
There's also suspect that he was a gambler. There's no documentation.
We know he played billiards.
And he enjoyed a good life.
Yeah.
I think if he had an American Express card, he would have been overloaded with it.
Back with Dr. James Pruett and the enigma of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart's genius after a look at this hour's headlines from the Monitor News Desk. Our subject this week is the composer Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, whose death 200 years ago the world is commemorating. Dr. James Pruett is chief of the Library of Congress's music division. He told us that, unlike most great composers, Mozart's genius was fully recognized while he was alive.
The genius of the man is acknowledged. It was acknowledged in his time. And all of the fuss made over him as a performing prodigy during his youth, I think that fuss became changed into a kind of awe from everyone, because they realized that the young Mozart was only the beginning, that the prodigy performer was turning into the prodigy creative mind. There's no explanation for it. It's a combination of genes, culture, and simple good luck, I suppose. But the mind of the man is, one hesitates to make these comparisons, but it's almost unparalleled. The ability to focus on the creative act, to draw from whatever resources he had in his mind and in his spirit, and create the works he did.
He said of himself, and other people have concurred, that he composed in his head. Works were assembled in his mind and then put down on paper, whole, orchestrated, complete. We even have descriptions of him doing it. Is that your understanding?
Oh, yes, and I think that's largely true. It shows up there's evidence for this, because the manuscripts that one sees of his work are all nice and neat and legible. It's as though he had spent hours and hours copying meticulously, when in effect he was transcribing from his mind. And there's these wonderful stories of him being in a conversation with people and composing at the same time, or being distracted, or not being distracted by people in the room. He would invite people in for coffee and sit over in the corner and write out the pieces while he listened to the conversation.
Yes, and
those are probably true, at least to some extent.
There's so many accounts of that. They must be true. And apparently rarely sat in front of the keyboard as he composed. It was all in his head.
Oh, absolutely.
And he didn't need to work it out on a keyboard.
The notion of carrying a piece of music in your head, of course, is commonplace to a performer, because performers do this. But the idea of solving certain kinds of structural problems, harmonic problems, orchestral problems, of solving those in advance is an act of intelligence that few people have.
We know that he did have a prodigious memory. He copied down a piece of music he heard at the Vatican a few hours after hearing it, apparently a lengthy piece of music. Memory must have played a great part in this, because he would compose something in his head, store it somewhere, and then retrieve it when he needed it.
But you know, I think to a large degree that's instinctive. You and I might go to a concert and we would be listening to a piece of music and we'd say, oh, that goes so and so. I think Mozart was there, and it was the proverbial empty vessel into which everything flowed, but he could retrieve it and bring it back. And I think that so much of his work was instinctive. It wasn't an effort.
No,
the effortlessness of it.
He was not an intellectual composer at all. He was a totally intuitive composer. Do you find in his music reflections of his life? We know a great deal about his life. He was with his mother. She died in Paris. But the Paris symphonies, to me, don't sound very dolorous. He loved his mother. Is there a relationship between the life and the music as they ran parallel, do you think?
No, I really don't. At the end of his life, in economic hard times, some success coming and some success not coming, he could still compose the Jupiter Symphony.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's an astonishing feat, I think. Now, I think, in general, composers tend to transcend the difficulties that they're undergoing. That's not entirely true, of course. But perhaps it's a kind of surcease from pressures.
Escape.
Escape.
When we think of Mozart, we think of his music, ornate merriment comes to mind first. He understood that whatever else he was trying to say in music, first you got to get him into the tent before you can preach the sermon. The melodies, the endless melodies that poured out of him, and he never repeats himself, does he?
No, no. There have been few people from the period who could be judged in the terms that one judges Mozart. There's an endless supply of melody. And the genius of the man is that he used the style that everyone was using, but he transformed it and elevated it to a degree that even Haydn was flabbergasted by the quality of the work. Yes.
Lived, yeah.
And one, I, like everybody else, I like to indulge in those superlatives too. But there was no doubt that people generally recognized him for the genius that he was and the effortlessness with which he went about his business.
And there's an amazing originality in his music. He wrote a great Mass in C minor, probably his greatest theological or liturgical work. The Agnus Dei is sung by a soprano, and instead of being pietistic, it's a love song to God. That's the only way you can describe it.
I think there are sections in the Requiem which you would say, if not love songs to God, at least songs of admiration.
Admiration. Right. He was not a deeply religious man, I understand. He was a Mason and a Catholic, which was not contradictory in those days.
No, I don't think it's contradictory at all. In fact, I think sometimes too much is made of his Masonic interests, and but perhaps not too much made of the Masonic emblems in Magic Flute.
The Magic Flute is based on...
No, I think he was like a product of his time also. People took their religion seriously, but not somberly.
That's right.
Right. There's no reason to pull a long face.
And Mozart's church music does not pull a long face. It's profound, it's joyful, it's the same mix as one sees in his operas, and some of the later operas, but especially Don Giovanni. There is this ebullience. Even in the gravest works, there's a quality of ebullience, of just high spirit that goes through his work.
Absolutely. And interestingly enough, I think this quality shows up in Don Giovanni, because Don Giovanni is a little bit of a conundrum. It's not a comic opera, and it's not an opera seria,
no.
But it's somewhere in the middle. And it's this marvelous blend of serious topic combined with sexual escapades and even a murder. And as you know, there are two endings. One for the converted and one for the not converted, perhaps.
In one, the Don repents and crosses a river and takes care of... In the other, he's dragged down to hell by the ghost of the commendatore, the man he's murdered.
And then there's the closing chorus in front of the curtain, if they want to use it, in which they're saying, this is a joke, or this is entertainment.
It's a joke, and also all the people who are singing, the people who endured Don Giovanni through his extraordinary life, say that they may have hated him. His servant Leporello says he's going off to find a master. His ex-lady friend Elvira is going to go to a convent. But all of them say something's happened in their lives that's extraordinary.
Yes, that's
and it's like the passage of Mozart through the world. Whatever you felt about him, he changed. Something extraordinary happened.
Yes, I think he changed, and it changed. He certainly changed the face of music in many ways. But he's also at the top of the peak. There was a certain style that was prevalent at the time. He stood at the top. He brought it to the top.
How far does his influence echo through 19th century music? He died in 1791, 200 years ago. How long do you see his influence lasting through the 19th century?
I think it has come and gone. Yeah. It's true that that the musical world was shocked by his death. In terms of respect for the man and love of the music, there were many, 2 or 3 collective editions begun right after that. So they knew what they had seen was terribly important. They wanted to preserve it. But in terms of the musical influence, I suppose it's in terms of spirit, in terms of future composers, especially Beethoven, studying his music to find out how he did this.
Dr. James Pruett is the chief of the Library of Congress's Music Division. The 200th anniversary of Mozart's death is being commemorated all over the world, in concerts, seminars, and symposia. If you want to reconnect with him, you need but to go to your room, close the door, and listen to any of his compositions, and he'll be there.